all rival European trading powers are neutralized. Nizam Hyderabad is under their influence. Carnatic is in their control. And Bengal, the most prosperous province of India, is in their kitty. East India Company's power and prestige are at an all-time high at this point. Surely EIC must have felt very emboldened on its achievements. But before the Union Jack could flutter securely over the whole of India, they still had to deal with formidable challenges from two major Indian states, the Marathas and Mysore. In this episode of Modern Indian History series, we will trace the gallant resistance that the Mysorean state will put up against East India Company. We are going to see how it will take more than 3 decades and 4 wars for the East India Company to finally extinguish this resistance. In case you are new over here, guys, then in this series, I, Jawwad Kazi, am taking up topics from Modern Indian History textbook of StudyIQ IAS so that you can build a robust base for your foundation of this subject. To understand the resistance of the Mysorean state, we first have to locate it in the peninsular India. This map is of Mysore at its peak under Hyder Ali. You can see it is surrounded by different powers with whom it will be constantly at war. To the north is the possession of Marathas under the leadership of Peshwa. Slightly east of that is Nizam's territory of Hyderabad. On the east is a buffer zone of Carnatic, but very close by are the British possessions around Madras. And to the southwest is Travancore, which is an ally of East India Company. To understand why Mysore is going to play the significant role that it played, we first have to dive and understand how the state emerges in the first place. Mysore, as we have discussed in a lecture on rise of successor states, rebel states and independent states on the ruins of Mughal Empire, was once a viceroyalty under the great Vijayanagar Empire. In Battle of Rakshas Tangdi or Battle of Talikota, when Vijayanagar suffers a crushing defeat, many of the sub-units of the state, which earlier too enjoyed tremendous autonomy, they chart their own independent existence. And Mysore was one such state that emerges under the Wadiyar dynasty. Around the mid-18th century, this state of Mysore is under the control of two ministers, Devaraj and Nanjaraj. These two ministers have made the Mysorean ruler a puppet in their hands. All power virtually is concentrated in the hands of these two ministers. Much like what we have seen in the case of Mughals in North India. A very similar situation is arising over here also. Consequently, the state of Mysore, which in any case is surrounded on all sides by formidable powers, finds itself in a very vulnerable spot. Major powers of Deccan and South India are constantly attacking and nibbling away the territory of Mysore. Nizam considered this area as part of Mughal territory and therefore he said that he had a claim over it. The Nizam has a claim over it. The ambitious Marathas who are on the ascendancy and want to expand southwards find Mysore in their way and naturally are attacking it for that very same reason. This is the kind of situation that Mysore finds itself in around the time when the rise of Hyder Ali is shortly going to start. The East India Company also has its fair share of interest in Mysore. Why is EIC so keen about control on the state of Mysore? There will be multiple reasons in the immediate context and in the context of rise of the Mysorean state. Reason number one was control over trade of the Malabar coast. The western coast, the Malabar coast, which in modern day is southern part of Karnataka and northern areas of Kerala, that Malabar coast was prosperous on account of the trade that was carried out on its coast. Naturally, East India Company, itself a trading power, wanted to secure itself this western area too, especially since the French already had a presence there. Second, threat to control on Madras. Mysore's territories were in close proximity to Madras, although not contiguous, but then pretty close to Madras for their comfort. And therefore, British always felt threatened by the rise of the Mysorean state, and not without any reason. In the first war, we will see how Mysore is going to reach right up to the gates of Madras. Thirdly, under Hyder Ali and later his son Tipu Sultan, Mysorean state is going to invest and rapidly ramp up its fighting capacity. The Mysorean state is going to, with the help of French officers and soldiers, increase the efficiency, effectiveness of its army. It will try to build an army based on modern infantry artillery combinations. So you have in those days 3 wings in the army. One is the cavalry, that is horseback soldiers. Second is infantry who walk on foot. And third is the park of artillery, which is big guns. Europe had revolutionized warfare in the 16th and 17th centuries. Instead of conventional horseback armies, which relied more on superior numbers, they devised better fighting methods by combining a large infantry supported by a park of artillery and a small cavalry. This system of fighting made the army much more superior to conventional horseback style armies, big cavalry based armies. Europeans brought that fighting technique to India and proved their efficacy beyond any doubt. We saw at Battle of Saint-Omer how a small French force was successful in overcoming the huge army of Nawab of Carnatic. And consequently, other powers, Indian powers, also realized this and started to ramp up, the most effective ones being the Mysoreans. Apart from this, the bonhomie between the French and the Mysorean state was something of a grave concern for East India Company. The French were serving under the Mysorean state as officers in the army. The French trainers were used in their armed forces. The French and Mysorean state had constant correspondence, and therefore East India Company felt extremely vulnerable about this. For these reasons, East India Company will look at Mysore with great suspicion. Consequently, over the next 3 decades, there will be 4 major wars that will be fought between Mysore and East India Company. A bird's eye view, guys, before we dive deeper into the wars, each one at a time. The first was fought from 1767 to 69, the first Anglo-Mysore war, in which Mysore will get the better of the other side. A humiliating treaty will be imposed on East India Company by Hyder Ali. The second Anglo-Mysore war will be fought from 1780 to 84, and in this war, Hyder Ali will die midway and the war will be continued by Tipu Sultan. This war ends with Treaty of Mangalore, where both sides agree for a draw. The first match, Mysoreans are victorious. The second match, it is a draw. Now, the third war will be fought from 1790 to 92 between Tipu Sultan and East India Company. In this war, East India Company will be much better prepared both diplomatically and militarily. And Tipu Sultan's army will be worsted and he will have to sign a treaty called as Treaty of Srirangpatnam, at the end of which he will lose a lot of territory and will also be forced to pay a huge war indemnity. That is the third war. So first war, Mysore victorious. Second war is a draw. Third war, EIC is victorious. So it is very much even Stevens over here, and therefore a tiebreaker is now required, just so that you can associate and remember things easily. And then last episode of the last war that will be fought between them will be fought in 1799, the fourth Anglo-Mysore war, when Tipu's capital Srirangpatnam will be sieged and Tipu will come out fighting and die defending his kingdom. That will be the end of Mysorean state under Tipu Sultan, and that will finish off challenge in southern peninsular India East India Company will now be secured in this part. We shall now go further into details of these 4 wars individually. Let us see first how Hyder Ali will rise to power. Hyder Ali, comes from a nondescript family, as in there is nothing illustrious or any strong background to him as such. Sheer merit, courage, and military genius helped this soldier in the Wadiyar army to rise in the ranks of the armed forces and become a very important commander for the state. Once extremely powerful and influential, Hyder Ali supplanted the 2 ministers Devraj and Nanjaraj and took the control of the state in his own hands. He implemented a strong administration and better military strategies, and in due course, he was able to transform Mysore from a very vulnerable and precarious state to a formidable one. Had it not been for Hyder Ali's rise, perhaps, there are no ifs and buts in history, perhaps Mysore would have been lost into oblivion. But it was Hyder Ali's administration, his strong military tactics that made Mysore a formidable player in the politics of South. He established for this reason an arms factory in Dindigul with the help of the French. We have seen that in our previous episode on the map also, where Dindigul is exactly located. He implemented Western training methods for his army. Clearly, the superior advantage that European fighting style had was visible to Indian powers. Hyder Ali had very well himself understood the importance or efficiency of these Western fighting styles and techniques. And therefore, in his army, he tries to implement these fighting techniques with the help of the French. He increased his military power during the Carnatic Wars in South India. While these companies, French and English and various Indian powers, they were distracted during the Carnatic Wars, Hyder Ali made the most of that opportunity and made the Mysorean army a very strong one. Once the army was strong, then he used this army to capture or conquer several territories around him. All the troublesome elements that Hyder Ali faced, all of those were subdued, including the different Nayaks and Paligars, so that the Mysorean state will be all powerful and will have direct flow of revenue without any middlemen in between. Although initially he had to suffer some defeats at the hands of the powerful Marathas, but post the death of Peshwa Madhav Rao, Hyder Ali retaliated and even reclaimed whatever he had lost to Marathas in terms of territories. So this is how, guys, Hyder Ali is going to rise and make Mysore a formidable state. A man of great ambition and energy, he was able to achieve the unthinkable. If you too have an ambition of making the fullest of the potential that you have and want to be a civil servant, then here's a good announcement for you. Our new P2I long-term batches are starting from 16th of September. Monday, we are starting these new batches. These are going to be evening batches starting at 6 p.m. These batches are aimed for 2025's attempt. Those students who are right now pursuing something else parallelly or are working currently or for some other reasons are not targeting 2024 as their next attempt, for them this is an ideal batch. It has all the features of P2I 1-year batch that we have been discussing over and over again. This batch will provide you live lectures. You will get hand-holding through mentorship, study material and notes that we are like the one that we are discussing right now, and many other features. This is like a one-time or one-stop solution for all your civil services exam needs. So don't think too much about it. Before time is out, enroll for this batch using my code JDLive so that you get a substantial and handsome discount on the fees. Instead of 70K, you will be paying only about 36,000 using my code. To get PDFs of my notes and updates about my lectures, you can join my Telegram channel using this QR code. This is my Telegram channel, Jawwad Kazi, UPSC preparation, so that you're constantly in touch about my lectures, notes, and other announcements. Okay, let's dive deeper now and see how the first Anglo-Mysore war is going to be fought. What is the context of this war and how it will turn out for the belligerent parties is what we will try to understand here. Let us first see the background of this war. East India Company was constantly worried about Mysore's alliance with the French. With great effort, East India Company had managed to defeat the French and finish off their challenge. At the end of 7 years' war, Pondicherry and some other places had been restored back to the French with the condition that they will not be fortified. But then the French were not limited or stopped from doing other things in the Indian subcontinent. And the French were keen about helping out the Mysorean state so that they could piggyback and increase their influence once again in India. For this reason, the East India Company was very much concerned about the Mysorean state, which was very close to French officers. They also wanted to have a control over the Malabar coast over here. This part is Malabar coast, southern tip of the coast of Karnataka and northern part of Kerala. That is Malabar coast. So the Britishers wanted to have access to Malabar coast, which was very crucial for trade on the western side. Furthermore, since East India Company did not have strong presence over here, this part was always vulnerable once again for increasing French influence. So that is reason number one. EIC had signed a deal with Nizam of Hyderabad for getting northern Sarkar areas. These areas, guys, here shaded in pink, these are northern Sarkar areas, which is part of coastal Andhra Pradesh and Orissa. This region was coveted. Here in the map, it has been shown as part of British possession in pink color because this is slightly later day map. But earlier, the Britishers wanted Nizam to give control of this area, got a treaty signed with the Nizam, and consequently they get access to it. This came at a cost of promise to protect the Nizam against the Mysorean state. Now, Hyder Ali, the Mysorean state under Hyder Ali, has enhanced its military prowess. And using this military prowess, it is fighting the Nizam also. And therefore, Nizam, who does not have as powerful an army as the Mysoreans, feels very vulnerable on his southern border. So he enters into this treaty with East India Company, giving it access to northern Sarkars in return for this promise for protection against the Mysorean state. EIC also allied with Marathas against Mysore. The Marathas also share a border over here with the Mysorean state, and now Hyder Ali is more powerful. The formidable Peshwas during this period are going through a phase of internal crisis, and taking advantage of that, the Mysorean army was constantly fighting with the Marathas, also regaining a lot of territory lost earlier. So in this entire background or context, the Mysorean state feels that East India Company now needs to be taught a lesson because it is interfering in the politics of Mysore, the foreign relations of Mysore, and it could not let it go unnoticed. Consequently, we'll see that the first Anglo-Mysore war will take place. Hyder Ali, who is fighting Marathas, he makes peace with the Marathas so that his northern border is secure. Through diplomacy, he gets Nizam on his side. Hyder Ali was not just a great military general, a genius, a good administrator, but he was also a very shrewd diplomat. He understood EIC's game. EIC wanted to isolate Mysore and finish it off first. East India Company knew that it was the Mysorean state which had understood their model the closest, and therefore it was a very big threat for it. The rapid advancement of its army would have obliterated the strategic advantage that EIC possessed. Therefore, tackling Mysore was their priority number one. And for this reason, Mysore also wants to, detach Indian powers from EIC. Therefore, peace with Marathas. And then Nizam also is removed from the side of EIC. And after this, a surprise attack was launched at the heart of East India Company's possession in southern part of India. The city of Madras itself is attacked by Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali's army reaches right up to the gates of the city of Madras. Now, in South India, the most important possession that EIC has is completely vulnerable to Hyder Ali's army, which has encircled it. Britishers realize that their position is very precarious and therefore they agree to sign a treaty at the dictation of Hyder Ali. Whatever terms are dictated by Hyder Ali, they accede to all of those terms, and that is what leads to Treaty of Madras in 1769. This is perhaps the most humiliating treaty that East India Company ever had to sign in India. At completely Hyder Ali's discretion, the terms were introduced in this treaty. EIC in this treaty also assured Hyder Ali that they would help him against any other power whenever it has to fight. So he also extracted this concession that East India Company will help him in his fight against other rival Indian powers if need be. This is how First Anglo-Mysore War ends with a thumping victory for the Mysorean state. Things will continue smooth for a few years, and then again some rumblings will start, which will take us to the Second Anglo-Mysore War. Here is again the map of Mysore, guys, so that you can have that reference before you. This, by the way, is Dindigal. Here you have Srirangpatnam and Mysore on the Kaveri River. This is Malabar coast. North of that is Kanara. Here is the area of Marathas, and this is Nizam's dominions. Okay, and here on the east you'll have Madras. So this is what it looks like at the time of Second Anglo-Mysore War. Let us now see the background of the Second Anglo-Mysore War. EIC did not help Hyder Ali when Marathas attacked him in 1771. So Treaty of Madras had made it compulsory on the East India Company to come to the aid or rescue of Hyder Ali whenever he fights other powers. Hyder Ali expected that East India Company will help him against Marathas, but the East India Company was smart. It was not ready to, come and fight for Hyder Ali against the formidable Marathas. This he saw as a violation of the Treaty of 1769, that is Treaty of Madras. And consequently, Hyder Ali will be offended. And furthermore, the British captured Mahe, a French territory on western coast of India. In Malabar, this place called as Mahe was there, which was a French possession under Hyder Ali's control. This area was captured by the Britishers, by the East India Company, and this was naturally a violation of Hyder Ali's sovereignty. The French over there were under Hyder Ali's protection. Therefore, Hyder Ali now will take offense on the East India Company. For this purpose, he builds a grand alliance of Nizam, Marathas and the Mysorean state and attacks East India Company, and the war will start in 1779. Okay, late 1779. So thus begins the Second Anglo-Mysore War. In this war, Hyder Ali seizes the initiative first and invades Carnatic and captures the capital Arcot. You remember the Nawab of Carnatic had been installed with British help, and the British had intended this area as a buffer for them so that Madras could be safe. He defeated the British army under Colonel Bailey in 1781. This is one of the most humiliating defeats that East India Company ever faced on the Indian soil. Many British soldiers, troops were captured and imprisoned in Mysore for a very long time after this particular battle. The British realized that they could not take on such a formidable combination. Back then, they were also fighting the war with Marathas. The first Anglo-Maratha war is also going on parallelly with this. And the fortunes of East India Company are at their lowest point right now. The Marathas are fighting with them. Hyder Ali is making lives very, very miserable for them. And parallelly in America, the 13 colonies have also rebelled against the British rule. and the Britishers are about to get defeated around this same point of time. Okay, and therefore this was a very low point for the British people as such. Understanding this, what did the British do? The Britishers broke the alliance between Mysore Nizam and Marathas. They made peace with Marathas with Treaty of Salbai, and therefore Marathas were out of the picture. They also got Hyder Ali to become neutral. After this, Hyder Ali will face a big defeat at Porto Novo in 1781. But despite this defeat in this battle, Sir Ayar Koot, the same officer whom we have met in earlier battles in South India, he will defeat Hyder Ali's army. And after that, Hyder Ali will still regroup and continue the fight. Unfortunately for the Mysorean state, Hyder Ali, who was already suffering from cancer, he dies in 1782. Tipu Sultan, the young prince who was already fighting in this war and had gained substantial experience of fighting under the command of his father, he was in the emergency made the next Sultan. So Tipu Sultan now takes over and continues the struggle between Mysore and East India Company for next several months, at the end of which both the sides, that is East India Company and Mysore, realized the futility of continuing the war because neither side was able to win anything strategic. And therefore, both sides settled with the Treaty of Mangalore. The Treaty of Mangalore is signed 1784, and with this comes to end the Second Anglo-Mysore War. Unlike the first war, where Mysore was victorious, in this second war, it is a draw. Neither side has won anything significant, and whatever they had taken from each other was restored back. So it's like status quo, jaise the, in that same position, both the sides go back. This is Second Anglo-Mysore War, guys. After this, the young Sultan who has taken over, he continues to nurse the ambition of expelling East India Company, and all his effort is geared towards that. Tipu Sultan was an innovative ruler, guys. We have seen in our earlier lecture how he introduced new types of coins, weights and measures, calendar, among many other things. He was also exceptionally fond of technology. This picture over here is that of a toy tiger, a mechanical toy tiger, which is attacking a British soldier. This toy tiger used to make noise also. I mean, it made sound as well. And this we are talking about, guys, 18th century. Back then, Tipu Sultan had got such a toy made, and he had a collection of many such impressive techno-savvy kind of things for those times. So the Sultan is focused upon building up a state which rivals East India Company, and therefore he is very conscious about advancing in technology. Apart from technology, he also understands that Indians alone may not be able to expel East India Company because EIC was a big naval power. With their command at the high seas, they would always be able to come back, and therefore he wants to build an alliance with international players. So he sent embassies to France, to Ottoman Turkey, so that a grand alliance could be built against the Britishers. So this was, very visionary on his part. He also expanded his territories at the expense of neighboring states, smaller states, and the most significant in that was the Raja of Travancore. In the map, we have seen how Travancore was the southwestern neighbor of the Mysorean state. It was contiguous to it, and the Mysorean armies, used to have a you can say conflict wala relationship with the state of Travancore. Earlier, the northern part of Kerala and southern part of Karnataka were taken over by Mysore during Hyder Ali's times. But since Travancore was a much more powerful state, up to this time, Mysore had not directly invaded it as such, although there had been a lot of wars. Now, in this melee, when Travancore was constantly threatened by an assertive Mysorean state, Travancore turned towards Britishers and became an ally of the British. The East India Company were always keen to have, rival Indian powers of Mysorean state as their friends or allies. And Travancore was very suitable for this purpose. It was distant, it was a close neighbor of the Mysorean state, and therefore a great strategic advantage for East India Company. Tipu in 1719 declared a war on Travancore because of this constant conflict that it had with the southern state. Now, by this time, since Travancore was an ally of East India Company, naturally it brought East India Company also in this war. The British now created a tripartite alliance, a triple alliance. Triple alliance between whom? East India Company, Nizam Hyderabad, and Marathas against Tipu Sultan. So Mysorean state is now faced by a formidable combination. Okay, combination of these three powers. See, in the first war, East India Company, Nizam and Marathas had combined against Mysore, but Hyder Ali got them all away from EIC and then fought EIC alone. In the second war, reverse was done. A coalition was built by Hyder Ali with Marathas and Nizam, but that coalition did not last long. Now in this third war, again a coalition is being built, this time between EIC, Marathas and Nizam. So now these three powers will fight against Tipu Sultan in the third Anglo-Mysore war. Let us see what happens over here. The British, with a formidable army under Lord Cornwallis, okay, they attacked Tipu Sultan's dominion. Tipu Sultan was able to push back some of these early attempts of the British, but ultimately Britishers were able to take up Bangalore in 1792. By the way, Tipu Sultan was born closer to the city of Bangalore. And later they besieged his capital of Srirangpatnam. Now, after a long siege, Tipu Sultan realized the futility of continuing this, and he had to come to terms and sign the Treaty of Srirangpatnam, which was a very harsh treaty for the Mysorean state. This Treaty of Srirangpatnam in 1792 will lead to heavy losses for Mysore. What all Mysore has to give at the end of this treaty? The Sultan had to give up almost half of his dominions. Half of the territory that the Mysorean state had was given to the Britishers and their allies. The British got Baramahal, which was in the southeastern part, Tamil Nadu part of Mysorean state. Dindigul, the famous place where arsenal of the Mysorean state was there, and the Malabar coast also. Something that the East India Company had long wanted. A strong foothold on the western coast of India was achieved during this war. The Marathas got regions around the Tungabhadra river. Tungabhadra river, that is northern areas of Mysorean state. The Nizam got areas from Krishna to Pennar. So all the three states profited at the cost of Mysore, the Britishers, getting the biggest territory. A war indemnity of 3 crore rupees was enforced on Tipu Sultan. After having to give up all of this territory, furthermore, he has to also pay up 3 crore rupees to the East India Company, and till he is able to do that, his sons would be taken as hostages. They will be hostages of the East India Company. And this famous painting that you are seeing, guys, over here is Tipu Sultan's sons being received by British officials because of this surrender Treaty of Srirangpatnam. The treaty reduced Mysore's power and increased the influence of Britishers in South India. Now the Britishers were a much more significant power in the politics of South. And a lot of credit goes to Lord Cornwallis, who had come to India as Governor General after having lost the war in America. Lord Cornwallis is the same guy who was leading the British Army in the American War of Independence, and there he had to surrender to George Washington, and to kind of resurrect his career, he was sent to India and he achieved a stellar success against the Mysorean state. And there are many other things that he did, not a subject here. In world history, we see those things. So now Tipu Sultan is ruling over a much more smaller state. Because a lot of territory has been lost, so resources also have reduced or shrunk tremendously. But this did not reduce Tipu Sultan's ambition of eliminating East India Company from southern India. For this reason, he increasingly tries to get help from the French. Already, the French had been serving in the Mysorean armies. French soldiers had been serving in East India Company's armies. French trainers had been employed, and there was a lot of communication between Tipu Sultan, Mysorean state, and the French. Correspondence was opened up between Napoleon and Tipu Sultan to build a grand alliance against the East India Company. Around this time in France, we're talking about the 1790s, guys. This is the period of the Great French Revolution taking place over there. And in this revolution, Napoleon had stellarly defended the revolution against the mob of Paris. He was later sent to Italy, where he was massively successful. And after that, he was sent on a campaign to Egypt. And from there was a plan being cooked up between all of these that the French would come to India. And that correspondence was going on to build a grand alliance of the French and the Mysorean state to fight against East India Company. The late 18th century and 19th century will constantly see that the British will be very, very finicky about Europeans coming back to India and being a formidable force here. The French being the most, the biggest threat in the 18th century, and in the 19th century, it will be the Russians. There's a concept, guys, called as the Great Game. The Great Game. We are going to see that in due course. The Great Game was a rivalry between the British and the Russian empires. The Russian Empire was advancing towards Central Asia and inching towards India. The British always felt very vulnerable with every advancement of this Russian Empire, and therefore the Britishers wanted to stop it in Afghanistan itself, and that will lead to a forward policy in Afghanistan in 19th century. So if it was the French who were the threat in 18th century, it was the Russians who will be the threat in 19th century. And at this point, Napoleon and Russians, they were at good terms with each other. Russians and Napoleon, they had signed a treaty of friendship. Napoleon was ruling over the rest of Europe, and it was only the Russian Empire in the east which had remained independent. So both of them had a sort of an alliance which will soon be broken later. More details when we start some series on world history. Tipu Sultan, inspired by what was happening in the French Revolution, established a Jacobin club in his capital. Jacobin club refers to the club of people who were leading the French Revolution around this time. These were the more radical leaders of the French Revolution, led by Maximilien Robespierre. He and his friends were called as the Jacobin Club. So he established this club here. He planted Tree of Liberty and allowed himself to be called as Citizen Tipu. Now, all of these things were in a way being done to develop the friendship with French and encourage them to come with a strong force in India under Napoleon's leadership so that the British could be removed from here. Unfortunately for him, Napoleon got trapped in Egypt. Although he was able to, take over control in Egypt, but the British Navy, which was always the rescuer of their country, it cut off Napoleon from communication with France. And that is when Napoleon could not advance any further. So Napoleon dumped his army in Egypt and went back to France, and there he will become the ruler in due course. So Tipu Sultan never really got that help that he had expected from the French. Chaliye, now let's see the fourth Anglo-Mysore War. We have seen the first, second, and third wars. Let us see the final installment of this series. Lord Wellesley, the imperialist, will be the Governor General of Bengal around this time. Lord Wellesley was an avowed imperialist. He came to India with this burning desire of making the British the paramount power of India. He used to call himself the Royal Bengal Tiger. In one old history book, I have read this, can't vouch for it, but I have read this, that even when he slept, He used to wear his entire medals with him. He was a military officer to start with. So he used to, wear that and go to bed. That's something that I have read. I can't vouch for that though. But then it tells the psyche of the person. He calls himself the Royal Bengal Tiger and he wants to subdue all Indian powers. And for him, the Mysorean state was the biggest threat. The Mysorean state was trying to build up things on very similar lines to the British. So it had a formidable army. It was trying to trade. It was trying to build an international coalition. And it was trying to invite no less than Napoleon to India. Now, this would have meant a very big challenge for EIC. Therefore, with a lot of aggression and promptness, Lord Wellesley, as soon as he comes to India, he takes on the challenge of Tipu Sultan as soon as he comes to know about correspondence with Napoleon. And that will start the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, which will be very brief but very intense. So Tipu's territory is attacked, and within a few weeks' time, the British army besieges Srirangpatnam, and for a few days, they are around the fort of Srirangpatnam. Tipu Sultan realizes the futility of the entire thing. He knows that it is only a matter of time before the fort will be breached and the British soldiers will enter. Yet, undeterred, he defies the Britishers, refuses to give up or sign any treaty with the British, and fights till his death. Okay, right on the last day, 5th of May 1799 is the day when Tipu Sultan will face his last battle. On the ramparts of his fort, he was himself leading his troops trying to resist and fight this invasion of the British. Okay, so 1799, finally, Tipu Sultan's rule will come to an end with his death. Now, post the defeat of Mysore, after Mysore was defeated, that is Tipu Sultan was defeated, a smaller Mysore state was again handed over back to a prince from the old Wadiyar ruling dynasty. This dynasty was made to sign a treaty of subsidiary alliance. Subsidiary alliance was a system devised by Lord Wellesley to keep Indian powers in subordination to him. I'm not going into it right now because that is coming up subsequently when we deal with the first few governor generals. So the details of what is a subsidiary alliance is coming up shortly. I'll suffice it at this point to say that it was an ingenious tool that Lord Wellesley had evolved from earlier agreements, of course. So he developed a system in which the Indian powers were kept as subordinate powers to East India Company. So a similar alliance was imposed on the new Mysorean state also. The English took over Kanara, Wayanad, Coimbatore, Dwarapuram and Srirangapatnam from the Mysorean state. So big chunks of territory from the state were taken over. Mysore was thus now eliminated as a rival power that the British had faced for the last more than 3 decades or so. British were now thus firmly established in South India, totally secure in their possessions. Yes, Marathas are there, but then we're talking about South India. They are parallelly dealing with Marathas also. Later, William Bentinck, of all persons, of all governor generals, William Bentinck was the person who actually assumed control of Mysore in 1831 from the Wadiyar dynasty. After having brought this back, in 1831, again, Mysore was taken over by the Britishers and the rule of Wadiyars was stopped. The reason was misgovernance, that is, the rulers are not discharging their duty effectively. That was the reason that was cited for this purpose. But later on, the state was again restored back in 1881 and continued to remain exactly in about 50 years later, and it will then remain a princely state right up to assimilation in independent India. So this is the history of Mysore, guys. Now we'll have a glance at all the 4 Anglo-Mysore wars so that we have a quick revision of the key details. First Anglo-Mysore War, 1767 to 69. This war is fought in the context of East India Company's alliance with Marathas against Mysore and also with Nizam against Mysore. Hyder Ali seizes the initiative. He gets Marathas and Nizams out of this alliance with EIC and attacks Madras. East India Company is defeated and a humiliating Treaty of Madras is imposed on East India Company in 1769. So these are the key facts. Then after this is the Second Anglo-Mysore War, 1780 to 84. The context of this is violation of Treaty of Madras by East India Company. By this treaty, they had promised to support Mysore against other powers, but when Marathas invaded, East India Company did not support it. Capture of the coastal town of Mahe. This was under the protection of Hyder Ali. It was with the French, but under Hyder Ali's protection. And when this is captured, Hyder Ali feels that it's a violation of his sovereignty, and this leads to Second Anglo-Mysore War, during the course of which Hyder Ali dies and Tipu Sultan takes over as the next ruler. Treaty of Mangalore is signed at the end of it in 1784. Outcome of this is a draw. The first one, Mysore was victorious. The second one ends up like a draw. Then comes the third treaty. Context of third treaty is Tipu's expansionism against its neighboring powers, especially against Travancore. In 1790, Tipu Sultan declared a war on Travancore, and Travancore had become an ally of East India Company. This gave East India Company what is called in IR language or military history language also, casus belli. Casus belli is reason for war. Reason for war, a pretext for war. Tipu's expansion gives East India Company this opportunity, and there's a war between the two from 1790 to 92. Tipu Sultan had also been trying to build an international alliance against the Britishers. He had sent embassies to the French and Ottoman rulers, and this naturally had made EIC very worried. Treaty of Srirangpatnam is signed in 1792. At the end of it, a huge indemnity is imposed on Tipu Sultan, and a lot of territory, almost half of his dominion, is taken away from him. Tipu is defeated, but he is not finished as such. He survives and hopes for fighting another day. Fourth Anglo-Mysore War will be because of the efforts that Tipu will take to defeat the East India Company one final time. Imperialist Lord Wellesley is the now new Governor General. He wants to end all Indian powers and establish British paramountcy, and the priority is Mysore, as Mysore is trying to correspond with Napoleon and invite him to India. Napoleon at this time, remember, is in Egypt. Okay, he is very close to the Red Sea. From there he can come to India, and the Britishers were always very concerned about this kind of alliance between the Mysoreans and the French. Napoleon, guys, had established his reputation in Europe as a formidable military general, and his arrival in India would have been a very big nightmare for the East India Company. Consequently, before Tipu does anything of that sort, or before Napoleon comes in, Lord Wellesley decides to invade Mysore. Tipu Sultan is offered subsidiary alliance to become a subordinate of EIC. The proud Sultan refuses that and rather prefers to die to death. Outcome, Tipu Sultan is defeated and killed, and the Mysorean state as it existed under Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan finally comes to an end. So these are the 4 Anglo-Mysore War, guys. All right, fine. Old ruling family is restored with a smaller truncated Mysorean state that we have seen already. Fine, let us take a couple of questions quickly. Consider the following pairs: Treaty of Madras, Third Anglo-Mysore War, Treaty of Srirangpatnam, Second Anglo-Mysore War, Treaty of Mangalore, First Anglo-Mysore War, and Treaty of Pondicherry, Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. So we have already seen the major treaties over here. Treaty of Pondicherry also has been discussed. The clue is not in this class. So based on this, you are supposed to answer this question in the chat box, comment box below, guys. Tell me what is the answer of this question. And I'm reading your comments. I like to see, some of you are trying to answer the question. Some of you personally send me messages. Don't do that. Answer it in the comment box below, because that encourages other students also to participate. So tell me the answer of this question in the chat box, comment box. Consider the following questions regarding Treaty of Awadh. This we have seen in our earlier lecture related to conquest of Bengal. Diwani as well as Nizamat rights of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa were given to East India Company under this treaty. Mughal ruler became a pensioner of the company. Allahabad and Kora were transferred to Nawab of Awadh. So Treaty of Allahabad we have studied in our last class. This is signed after the Battle of Buxar. The first statement says Diwani as well as Nizamat rights were given to EIC. Now Nizamat rights were not given, only Diwani rights were given, and therefore first statement is wrong. The Mughal ruler Shah Alam became the pensioner of East India Company, and this fact is right. You remember 26 lakh rupees per annum was the pension that was decided for him. Allahabad and Kora were transferred to Nawab of Awadh is what the statement says, and this statement is wrong because it was not transferred to Nawab of Awadh. In fact, it was transferred from Nawab of Awadh to the Mughal ruler. So third statement is also wrong. Consequently, only statement 2 is right. So answer is C. So this concludes our discussion, guys, for this session. In our next class, we are going to see the conflict between East India Company and Marathas. I hope you're enjoying this series. If you've liked this video, then do leave a comment below, share it with your friends and smash that like button. I'll see you in my next class. Thank you.